So welcome everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and I'm really excited. We have two professors emeritus with us today, Grace Ann Rosile and David Boje. And we're going to have a wide open conversation about storytelling and qualitative research and how it's evolved over time and where we see it going. So with that, let me just tell you for a moment why we're doing this, what we hope to accomplish. First off, I want to capture a movement of thought that I have seen develop over my career, as these two have as well. And qualitative data used to be kind of the wild, wild west, and now it's gotten to be these pretty confined silos of ideas. And so we have some ideas to share about where it might be going. I want to hear their stories because these two people are great storytellers. And to help qualitative researchers that are master's and doctoral students now see some of the magic that's possible and really what could be meant by this lived experience concept, and to learn from those who've come before us. So, and we have with us today two people who have a ton of books they have written. So at the end of this, there will be all kinds of resources and other things you can click through, etc. So with that, welcome again. And let's just say, Grace Ann and David, please tell us a little bit about yourselves and what has driven you in this work over your lifetimes.
Okay. I was an English major, and so people used to say you can do anything with a general liberal arts degree. And my response was, you can do anything but nothing in particular. So after college, I went to graduate school and somehow ended up in the College of Business and focused on organizational behavior. Because having been an English major, what I loved was the people's stories. And when I found out, it wasn't until after my PhD was done that I ran into David, like 10 years after my PhD. And I said, wow, you can do stories and have it be business? That's fabulous. And so that brought my two streams of interest together. And so my introduction to storytelling in the business world was through David. So later on, when we talk about what changes have come about, I guess I've sort of been in the front of those changes because I learned it all from David.
Yeah. So before David tells his story, I just have to tell our viewers that first time I met David, it was at a faculty meeting. I know who he is. This kind of casual guy comes into this faculty meeting and everybody is like, wow, David Boje. Wow.
The rare times.
And I'm a little cocky thinking, who is this guy? So David, how did you come to be that guy?
Well, when I met Grace Ann, my whole life changed, because she's into the mystical arts. And no, you're not. I'm discovering new things about her every day. But she led me into seeing a side of myself I've never seen before, sort of getting in touch with, we did a lot of insight seminars. And, well, she said she wouldn't date me unless there was personal growth and development on my part. So I guess...
So you were
she's had a big impact on me.
Were you a professor of organizational development, or?
I was a professor of organizational behavior, graduated University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And they taught me all about empiricism and statistical analysis and everything else. And there was one guy, Lou Pondy, who cultivated my interest in storytelling. He could see by my writing I was really into studying storytelling, and he encouraged it. And he went on to study anthropology as a professor on sabbatical. And, it piqued my interest, motivated me to pursue storytelling from then on.
Okay. So this
So I'm
is
a
early
storyteller
days.
researcher. I'm a researcher.
Yeah, yeah. So this is early days. Storytelling's just evolving.
Yeah.
So tell us a story.
Well, I sent you a couple of photos. I'm building an Earthship greenhouse, repacking old used tires I got from the tire shop up the street, and for free. And I'm taking recycled materials and trying to build a greenhouse that works in the desert. We only get 10 inches of rain a year, so I'm collecting, harvesting rainwater and trying to build something out of recycled materials that'll work. Basically, I'm interested in the watershed. How do you treat your land as a watershed instead of just getting tap water? So I'm looking at how water comes down in rainfall and snowfall and how it travels and traverses the earth. And, the water courses through the veins of the soil of the earth. And treating it as a watershed is a whole different storytelling approach than tap water, if that makes any sense.
It actually makes a lot of sense. Where we are, people are building tree or planting trees in Ireland with the idea that it will help the sub-Saharan African desert.
Yeah. Well, the
So,
water travels all around the world with the clouds and the winds, and we're all made of the same water.
so looking at qualitative data, which is probably why some of the people watching these tapes came, because they think they want to be qualitative researcher. How have you seen it change over the years? And you have made some bold comments about interviews, etc. So tell us what you think about qualitative work that right now, and how have you seen it change? When did you think it needed to change? And some of that,
Sure,
please.
sure. For me, when I was studying the office supply in Los Angeles, there's a group of office supply companies under one ownership, and I discovered that people weren't telling whole stories. They rarely, as you transcribed 8 months of conversations, you could hardly find any stories that were whole stories. Instead, you found little fragments, little snippets here and there, and you had to read between the lines, and you had to fill in the blanks, and you had to do something called intersubjectivity analysis to really understand what the storytelling was at all. And Harold Garfinkel is somebody I met and had dinner with, and came to my house and my classes, and I went to his. And he was very into ethnomethodology, the study of methodology, and how we fill in very terse stories. We get little terse fragments, and then we fill in meaning around them. So that's where I decided that qualitative research really needed to change, because people were assuming that you could just go out and gather stories whole, like you pick fruit or something, pick tomatoes or oranges, but it's more like gathering grains of sand and composing something, or seeing how it's composed. And Grace Ann and I go through these little exercises where we try to understand each other. And because we've known each other for 24 years and been married 23 years, I guess, right? It's true. Then, we know enough about each other to fill in the blanks, but when you meet a stranger or a situation you don't know very well, you don't know what to fill in, so much of the storytelling is untold, if that makes any sense, I hope.
It does, actually, because I'm thinking about my own, and two things came to mind. One is if I'm filling in the blanks, my own biases are going to fill in those blanks for you. And the likelihood of my worldview and your worldview being the same diminishes with context and age and everything else. The second thing is, if I'm thinking about my early qualitative experience, it really rings true that you only get snippets. They answer your question. If you're doing key informant interviews, they answer your question, but you don't know whether or not your question encompassed their worldview at all.
No.
So they're giving you something, but it's filling your thing, not you seeing theirs. So it rings true. Does that feel right? And please add to it.
Gracie?
The part that I completely agree, and the part that I add to it is having been an English major, I love words and stories. But what I found was for 10 years I raised horses and trained them myself, and I found that that sometimes words don't exactly capture the experience. So now we've incorporated what we call embodied storytelling, because I'll tell you a story. The classic example
okay.
of I got invited to this conference with David, I think only because I was with David and worked with him on storytelling, and all of the top people in the field were there, and including Carl White, who we talked to, wonderful man. And so I was doing a presentation on this different idea of how leadership and hierarchy works, because my experience with my horse was, it was a shared, negotiated process of our riding. And someone in the audience it came from a strong critical theory perspective said, no, that's domination, because you can't exchange roles. And so we went back and forth a couple of times about why I didn't think it was me dominating the horse.
I just insert you. I was sitting in the back row with Carl White, and this French guy started to harass Grace Ann when she was presenting and saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," and the rider dominates the horse by the training, etc. And I said, "Carl, watch this. She's gonna cut him off at the knees." And then we watched.
No, it wasn't. He just wasn't getting it. So finally, I said to him, I said, "And you tell me who's in charge."
Told you.
And
then Carl was so excited, he ran out and phoned his wife immediately. Hey,
told us.
I just saw the most amazing presentation by Grace Ann Rosile on horses and horse sense and sense making,
So the whole, even our conception of what a word means is different for each person. And when we just restrict ourselves to language, then we miss out on some of the meaning and some of the rest of the story, that's partly feeling. So what you just said, Alana, about the conversation, about missing the point and answering questions and those kind of things, that's what we have. Our most recent work is about the conversational storytelling, where it's a back and forth. It's a shared process, and it's a negotiated. then it allows for things to come out that neither party knew.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's a synchronicity between people. And if we want to play into that mystical world that David mentioned, it's because there's more than just two people, individuals here. There's connections at all different levels. There's our ability to tap into that connectedness that differs between us. But if it's really synchronistic, you get that juice that flows between you and you come up with stuff. Both of you just go, oh, that was so satisfying.
Yeah.
Because we both went places we didn't know we could go.
Right. Right.
Yeah. That's beautiful moments. Okay. So beautiful exchange gives us a sense of qualitative work going to a place. And I would say it would include, in terms of new researchers who are going to be watching this, it goes to a place where emotional intelligence becomes really important, where metacognition becomes really important. So I know what I am, reflection with an X. So I'm aware of my sense. So I'm building this picture now in my head of qualitative work, and it's got a mind map of a lot of other things pointing into it. That's pretty exciting. Let's see what else we thought. So now we're into, like, I know Boje, and Boje has a list of philosophers that are like this. so David, please give us some sense of again, for the students who are watching, they're going to need to tie these ideas back to some theoretical components so they can meet the needs that they have of going from here to here to here to do a dissertation or thesis. Help them out with that, please.
Sure. I limited to 5, my top 5. So Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian philosopher, he did a lot of writing in 1920s and 1930s, and he was actually exiled to Siberia for going against historical materialism and the dialectic. So he created all this stuff about polyphonic dialogism, multiple voices.
Oh.
And, you know, I constantly go back to his work again and again. I mean, in the last few weeks, I've been rereading some of his essays in dialogic imagination. And I'm just surprised at how much new stuff I'm learning that I missed before. So, for example, his whole thing is you have a whole bunch of languages, right? So when I'm building the Earthship greenhouse, there's the Earthship discourse language, there's photovoltaics, there's gardening, there's watershed management, rainwater harvesting. You know, it's just a whole set of sciences that you're trying to tune into. And then that diversity is counterposed by the way that mainstream treats its food, its water, its human beings, and we're centralized, I think, into one kind of logic. In the United States, in particular, we have a kind of neoliberal focus on capitalism, and water is to be purchased, privatized, commodified, and it loses its organicness. So what I'm trying to do is look at this interplay, this contest between centralizing forces and decentralizing forces. And he came up with the word heteroglossia for this dynamics.
Say that again.
Heteroglossia.
Heteroglossia. Okay.
Like heterogeneous, and then there's many glossias.
Okay.
And it's the idea you have so many different disciplines and languages and sciences and popular discourses, and they're all in this mess.
Complexity soup.
Yeah, he says the background is a heteroglot. In other words, you just don't know what this is. It's just very confusing. And then in the foreground, people are creating stories and narratives to make sense of it, some of which are very, very monologic and confining, very constraining, and others are trying to open up and be diverse and plurality. And anyway, so he's my number one. My number two pick is Walter Benjamin, who wrote the essay on the storyteller and said storytelling is coming to an end because we're no longer singing the songs of the ship people and the miners, and the craftspeople aren't really working together in groups anymore. They've kind of been separated in division of labor, and we work in these consoles with computers and managers and hierarchy, so he's saying that that's really destroyed the fabric of storytelling, from lived experience, as you were saying, to something more artificial, more abstract, more. I think we're into what's called developing these politics of personality now, not living organically. So that's, I won't go further into Walter Benjamin, but I mean, if you're going to go into storytelling, Bakhtin and Benjamin are essential. And then for our work that we've been doing recently, Charles Saunders Peirce is really, really important, because from him we get the whole idea of science as a self-correcting process. And he talks about the relationship between your theory being deductive, your qualitative work being a set of inductive experiments, inductive self-reflections. And then his fabulous term is abduction, where think of it as a wild guess, as a hypothesis, as something, I sort of think something is happening here. I'm going to call it an abduction. Now I got to go test it with a qualitative method or a quantitative method, either one. And then through that induction, maybe I can build some theory, or I can see how some theory works. So we call it the AID model, the abduction, induction, deduction. So what's new in qualitative research, I think, is we're just going away from just doing in qualitative inquiry to now working with the theory and working with the abduction and putting the three together. And that's what we're doing in the self-correcting storytelling conversation book that Grace Ann and I wrote. Grace Ann did most of the organizing.
Aren't you lucky?
And
aren't you seriously lucky?
just a quick shout out to Karl Popper. I got interested in him when I was visiting New Zealand for a month, and 2 years in a row, actually. And there was a Karl Popper building, and I was going like, who's this Karl Popper guy, and why was he here, and what was he doing in New Zealand, Christchurch, New Zealand? And it turns out he was exiled from Germany, fleeing the Nazis, and he wanted an English-speaking country that would let him in and continue his work, and the only one that took him was New Zealand at the time. So he was there for a number of years, and there's a story in the book of how this guy went to one of his lectures, a scientist, and won the Nobel Prize because he asked a question to Karl Popper, like, my theory, my great theory is being disproved, and now I'm never going to be known as a great thinker. I'll never get a Nobel Prize. And Karl Popper said, look, develop a test to disprove your own theory, to refute your own theory, and you will be great. And so he did the test, and it got picked up and used in another project, and he got the Nobel Prize. Remember his name? We'll send you his name. Yeah.
Eccles.
Eccles. His name was Eccles, and he got knighted Sir Eccles. in England. So anyway, Sir Eccles was there. So they just created all kinds of mischief when the two of them were in New Zealand. They were afraid that higher education wasn't treating scientific inquiry and scientific development seriously, and they actually nailed a proclamation on the door of the chancellor, that they needed to treat this
Mischief.
seriously.
Mischief.
Yeah, so and the last one is Martin Heidegger, and he's been really influential in developing anti-narrative theory, anti-narrative theory, because he's dealing with that whole storytelling. He wants the whole of history, the whole of all of the voices together, much like Bakhtin. And he's got some concepts for dealing like force structuring. How do we work in advance to force structure something when we don't know what that something is? How do we get it to happen? So he has a number of concepts that we've applied to anti-narrative work, and it speaks to making an ontological turn. By that I mean beingness, not just knowingness, but being in the world. Like when I'm working with the greenhouse, I'm being with the clay and the sand and the wetness, and I actually get my muddy boots on and get in there and work with, I take the gloves off and I'm mashing straw and clay and making cob, and that kind of hands-on being in the world. It's really different than reading about it and you say, oh, you watch a YouTube and say, oh, here's how you make cob. You may have 2 pails of sand and 4 pails of clay, but you test your clay sand mix, and well, all that is out the window when you get into the real world. You just got to play with the materials until you get a mix that works. And how much clay do I put in? How much straw? Well,
that's a great analogy for qualitative research. The first time you do it, you've got this, all these people you've read, and they say you should do this, and you've had to present. I know this is a system you don't like, but I'll just go back to the key informant interviews. You're supposed to do this, you're supposed to have these, and then you go out, you meet people, and you're winging it. You're so winging it, trying to figure out how do you get those people to tell you anything that can answer these questions that will get you out of your doctoral degree.
Yeah, they think you're from another planet, which you are. And when I do those semi-structured interviews, then they're required by everybody, every university, every doctoral program. What are your questions you're going to ask, and you need to register them with the IRB, Institutional Review Board, or Ethics Committee, et cetera. And, it just takes all of the science out of it, because you're not doing inquiry anymore. You're pretending you already know what answers you're going to get from the questions you're going to ask. So there's no self-correcting going on by that other person.
How does somebody in your model approach an IRB? What are the questions they put down for an IRB? How do they manage them?
Make them up.
We make up some questions and we submit them.
Well, it's always, we're starting from here, and these are backup questions in case the person needs them. That's the way you present it.
No, we tell them we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh, well, conversation really isn't covered by the IRB.
Yeah.
That's not really research. And I go, okay, fine. Does that mean I don't need an IRB? No, you need an IRB. You're going to talk to another human being. Right. Okay. Well, here, these are the kind of topics we'll be covering in the conversation. And I might ask a question like this, this, and this.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is where I think, I ended up getting involved in indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous studies, indigenous science. And there is kind of a funny story, but there was a grant, a call for proposals, and they wanted someone to teach ethics to the tribes. And I was like, they should be teaching us.
No kidding.
And some idiot is going to apply for this money and do it the wrong way. So I'll apply. And so I ended up getting into indigenous studies. And so what I found was part of it goes back to the image of riding a horse, right? I always thought, why are all these images in strategy and everywhere? They're so static and stationary that we're trying to capture the snapshot or identify the one path for strategy, you know? And it's not like that. It's always changing. So, you know, when you want your horse to turn right, it's sure you pull on the right rein, but there's a whole bunch of other things that you have to do depending on the circumstances and where the horse is and all of that. And our models don't accommodate that very well. Indigenous models, ways of knowing, they assume that the state of the world is flux all the time. And so it's been compared to quantum physics, that it's much more compatible with quantum physics. And so a lot of what we have done, and it was interesting when I was starting this work, David said, well, their stories are different too. They tell stories in a different way. And he had been writing about what he called living story. And it turned out that what David called living story, that he, through observation and organization, saw as the way storytelling takes place in situ, as you would say, it's very much like the indigenous approach. Mm-hmm. So it's not linear. It's constantly changing. So it's all of these other things. And why was I talking about that?
Well, you were going to tell that you actually took a course on Derrida.
For my philosophers, I did sit in on those philosophy classes, didn't I? Anyway, way back in the early days, one of the concepts that influenced me and Derrida's work, especially in language, is that the meaning is not in just the word, but there was a metaphor used that it's like music. And so you don't get the melody until you have what came before and what comes after. And so that's what David has always emphasized too, the context. And so this image that it's not meaning until we know what came before and what comes after influenced my views of research and storytelling. Derrida and Lyotard. Mm-hmm.
This conversation reminds me of I was watching a master class by a physicist whose name I forget at this second, but he said that science today is at a frontier, and the only science we can have is stabbing at a question and hoping we're even on the right path, that our question, that we're not off on some thing over here studying something that will turn out to be meaningless, that really all scientists should come to this with the sense of, I know nothing, but my best guess right now is, where is my best guess going to take me? So personally, we are expecting young scientists who are just coming out of a class where they've been told this by this, by this, by this, and then we're launching them into a world where they have to get really comfortable really quick with constant change. And if they're going to be good, they need to have that creative right brain, left brain thing going on from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's why we have worked for 20 years with Henri Sauval in France. And I think he's influenced both of us. It's been an interesting process. But their view of interventions in organizations is that every intervention is an experiment. It's exactly what you said, Alana. They come in with like, well, we don't know. Let's look and see. What do we see?
Yeah. Yeah, they're 99% listening and 1% questions. So they really
That's really
stress.
difficult. I mean, in an American institutions want to hire a consultant and they want the consultant to consult. They don't
Yeah.
want the consultant to come in and listen.
Yeah, well, they
Yeah.
listen for months at a time and just really soak in all the discourses, the political, the executive, the technical, engineering, everything. They just soak it all in and they say, oh, your script is kind of a mess. They say approach it as a theater script and say, well, it's a discombobbled mess. So what we'll recommend is you get a better script. We'll write a better script that makes better sense for everybody. And they really get them to take notice of the language and the discourse and what our contribution has been is to the storytelling. So we've been encouraging them to adopt storytelling as a method.
Well, let's see what next we thought. Okay, so we kind of got into this. If you're back to our new researchers who are watching, they kind of like this idea and it rings true for them. How would you suggest that they go about approaching their work differently or to embrace some new ideas? And where should they start? What should they watch out for? And what are the big pitfalls that they better have on the horizon so they don't fall into them?
You want me to take this one or you want
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we've mentioned conversational storytelling interviewing as an alternative to semi-structured interview. So we think that that's a really important step because so much of research in general and qualitative research in particular teaches you to leave your own story at the doorstep and not to fully participate as an embodied human being in that situation. So in self-correcting storytelling, you have to put your skin in the game. You have to share your story. You've asked us to share our stories about being researchers. You shared your stories back, Alana. So that exchange on both our skin is in the game. So, and from there, you're trying to, on the spot, call it emotional intelligence or ontological intelligence, and you're saying, okay, now they've shared a story with me or a fragment. I'm going to share one back to show I know what they're talking about, maybe, and I'm going to hit or miss the mark, and they're going to correct me. But also, if they share something and it's a bit sexist or a bit racist or a bit weird, I'm going to share one back that's contrary. I'm going to push them. Or if I think they're waffling, I'm going to share a story back that's got a little bit of bite in it. Not much, just a little nibble to see if I'm trying to refute what they're saying without being obnoxious, which I have a lot of difficulty with, by the way. But how do you challenge them right there in the interview situation? How do you don't just see, there's so much that Charles Saunders Peirce and Popper agree on, and one of those things is you don't just confirm everything. Like, aren't executives great leaders? Oh, well, yes, they are. They're wonderful leaders. And we go really? Are they really that wonderful? And, you learn to refute, to disconfirm. Popper called it the art of falsification, where you're trying to refute as you go. So you're not disconfirming. I think there's a term for that in validity, studies where you're confirming your own suppositions, instead of actually doing the inquiry work. So that gets back to that abductive, inductive, deductive. If you can use that trilogy together, you can actually do some testing as you go, and then you can do some more major tests. just to wrap it up here. What you should watch out for is getting into the trap of leaving yourself out of the investigation,
I hear that.
and the trap of not including your own self-reflexivity in the event of the research itself. So we've been trained to be non-biased, but that's impossible. So put your biases out there and let them put their biases out there, and negotiate and weave them through until you can correct enough of the image that you think that maybe you're getting closer to something interesting and rich and exciting that you can have some synergy around with the other person. Grace Ann?
Do you go along? Those are all like excellent, and I'm wondering if you go along with the typical qualitative idea that we keep asking questions until we keep hearing the same answers, and then we think we've got it.
Oh, maybe. Well, Charles Saunders first proposed 4 tests. 1, you engage in self-reflexivity and you try to challenge whatever abduction you're engaged in, whatever theory you're playing with, whatever inductions you're getting. So you just try to really challenge that. And I think people can do a good job of that if they sit with those ideas and just try to refute them themselves. Now, if you can't refute what you're getting in your research, you go to test 2. You got to grab some other people and see, do the way I'm seeing the world and the way you're seeing the world, are those the same, or like
It's the same
really
world.
different? And you're going to find out more times than not they're really different. And each person you talk to is so unique and different. It's I think only at the very simplest level, you're going to get like asking 9 people and 9 people tell you the same thing. I mean, you got to be asking such a simple question like, are you alive today, or something? I don't know. Is the sun out? And the sun is there. You know?
That one would not work in Ireland.
It won't work in Ireland. See, nothing is in agreement. So then you go to test 3. If you need it, go to test 3. You don't have to do all the tests, but test 3, actually pick up some other sciences and read them and say, okay, well, your theory here is intersubjectivity, but in neuroscience, it says that your chemical imbalances are responsible for what you're seeing, or something. Or you go to social materiality, you think it's about language, hey, it's about materiality, you know? So you go into, like on the greenhouse thing, I got to study hydrology, I got to study geomorphology, I got to study harvesting, photovoltaics, I got to, and then it challenges my own naive thinking that, hey, how come the roof is blowing off the greenhouse? Well, your walls aren't up, the wind is coming underneath. I'm out there in a 35-mile-an-hour wind on a ladder, putting extra screws in the roof so that it doesn't blow off. You know what I mean? Well, fortunately, I survived. Unfortunately. Anyway, and then the 4th test is more expensive, but it can be done during the interview process itself. So that's where we intervene and we experiment. Now, you can conduct really fancy experiments with control groups and all of that, but in the storytelling conversation, you can have those moments where you try to refute, or you try to, well, let's take it off on this direction and see what they do with it. You learn to experiment in situ. I think that's a skill to really watch out for, to really learn that you're not getting, I don't think. I don't see it in the students I try to work with. The pitfalls, no. There's a lot of pitfalls out there. One is stories get treated as cases. as examples of some quantitative research or something else. And that's really dangerous pitfall. I'm just going to focus on the one pitfall because that means you're trying to substitute a story to represent a whole phenomenon and use it like a metaphor or simile or something. And you're missing out what is totally exciting about storytelling, which is the dynamic processes through history, through place, and how, use the word multiplicity, how you have multiple voices and multiple discourses colliding. And if you watch that collision, you study that. You can't just take one story out and say, oh, that's the story. You know, that's like believing in fake news or something. The end.
So I would add to that what I see the biggest pitfall and what beginners miss is going to one of two extremes. One is to think that now I have this beautiful story and that's it. And that's not it. That's just the start of your research and your analysis of why did that story strike me? What is there about it? And, what concepts come into play here. And so you need to begin and beyond just a surfacey kind of theme analysis. Oh yeah, they mentioned return on investment, or they mentioned getting along with your merger partners. You need to do a little bit more sophisticated analysis. And so sometimes people think, oh, storytelling, that's easy. We'll just tell these stories and that's it. And it gets into what we'll talk about. You had asked about future directions. And we think that a more innovative combination of qualitative and quantitative is what is the most important development lately, and that we try to emphasize that you don't want to turn storytelling into a pseudo quantitative study of they said, they mentioned sharing and communication 16 times and turn it into numbers. It's not about that, but it's about using helpful the basics of how many people were in your sample, how many people discussed this theme, how many, a little bit more of helpful quantitative support your qualitative study. And so sometimes beginners miss that.
Well, and because if I'm going to, once our story's out there, once it's written, our research is written up, then we're opening it up for the world to judge. Mm-hmm. And how can others judge our story if there's no quantitative backup? I mean, are you telling me what 2 people said, or are you telling me what 400 people said? Mm-hmm. And if 400 people said it, there's going to be some range there. So I want to know a little bit about that range. Mm-hmm. Just in order for me to have enough context in my head to look at what you've done and to see whether or not it's useful to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you need the level of transparency that you have in quantitative work. Just how did we go about this? Where did this data come from? And then the story tells the story.
Okay. Yeah. I'm when I hear you talk, and maybe some of the students who watch, I get a little nervous because it's like, whoa, there's a lot of work that goes on here. At what point do I cap it? I want to be done with this project. It seems like if I really take it to the places that the philosophers you're talking about and the processes you talked about, Grace Ann, I could be in this one piece of research for 20 years.
Welcome to our life.
So, what do you do with that? How do you know that, okay, because not every story is worth 20 years.
Right. No. And
How does a human being decide the worthiness to know enough is enough now? Okay, it went, so I could have done these other things, and maybe I can recommend other people who might want to follow this can do these other things, but for me, enough is enough.
Well, I think you got to ask what, in your question you sent us, what are the next big questions, and it should be something big enough that you're willing to spend that much time and effort on it. And for me, the watershed, climate change, the Anthropocene, those are big questions because if we don't get those answers right, you're talking about 3 or 4 billion people are going to disappear, and within a century, and that's like almost half the people on Earth, and half or more of the animals have already disappeared, and we're running into all kinds of shortages of water, and we can't seem to get the American administration to put a lid on fossil fuel. Instead, they're fracking and destroying more water systems. Anyway, so those to me are the big questions. So I'm 72 years old. I'm not going to spend 20 years till I'm 92 on silly questions,
Right.
Like,
Right.
what is the way to develop your narrative personality or something? And I don't really care. I mean, I care about concrete, grounded things in the world that I live in. I live in a state that has 10 inches of rain a year. I live in a desert. I mean, I should have some accountability for being in that place. So our research is very much about place and about history and trying to pull not just a story out, but how do I explain that half of the population of the United States either doesn't care about climate change or is in denial or is off on some little sub-interest and doesn't care where their food comes from, that their health is suffering, And then there's half the people that are like, yeah, this is a climate emergency. We got to be really caring about what we do. So that to me is a big problem, a big question. And I want to understand, well, why is it that sometimes storytelling is very impactful and other times people will adopt a fake story and sell it to the public, and the public will, oh yeah, okay, I could buy that. And there's just no scientific way to sort out fact from illusion, Well, I want to tackle that's a big problem. And that's why I turned to Peirce and Popper and Bakhtin and, Walter Benjamin and Heidegger, because they have bigger ideas, I think, for dealing with that. Anyway, that's my answer.
I have a different answer.
Oh,
let me
of
feed
course.
back. Let me feed back so that I make sure that I understood it. So on one hand, I heard you say that in terms of topical interest, you're choosing topics that are worthy of 20 years, like water. And on the other hand, I hear that scientifically and methodologically, you're concerned about when people buy stories that aren't based in any kind of evidence, and why some stories have good, well-founded research stories have impact and others don't. So those things are big questions we all should be asking, because if we're doing this work, we want our story to show that it did this work, and how then do we catapult it into having positive effect in our world. So I kind of hear you asking, the next big question is, once done, what good is it? How do we make it have some good?
Yeah.
Am I on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's why we like the self-correcting process. It has to be a process. It has to be where you're investing in that other person that you're going to spend time with. They're investing in you, and maybe you're visiting them more than once. Maybe you
Yeah.
go back 2, 3, 10 times to really get a sense of what's flowing through their life and your own life. And how can you understand their context if you interview them in an office or room somewhere and you haven't visited those contexts, the political, the uh, economic context, cultural, their family, everything is this whole bundle. Um, anyway, so yeah, you got it. I think
Okay.
you got me.
Okay. Good. Okay.
So I'll
Grace
look
Ann.
at another side of it, sort of the micro side. So, and what happens is students go out and they have notes and they have tapes and they have all this information and they go, now what do I do with all of this? It's overwhelming. And so I think that was part of your question anyway. And that is the beauty and the scary part. The beauty is that you can go any which way, but you have to choose. And the way you choose, it can be David's way of what's the most important for society and for me. It's my value for this. And
Yeah, okay.
but just turn it off, David. But what you can also choose is there are a range of possibilities and directions for you to take. And so the opportunity is to see what is my interest. So my interest right now is a lot of how do people work together in ensemble processes to create together telling, together stories. And so I'm looking at that. And so when I look at the range of comments,
I'll tell him.
Somebody wants you and then calls the other one. If not, first one doesn't answer.
Well, get this answer out, Grace Ann.
okay. So you have an opportunity to go in many directions, but you need to focus on what is your point from this. And that focus can come from, this is the journal I want to put it in. This is the subject area that's most important to me. And it doesn't have to go on endlessly. You need to make those choices. And the good thing is that there's enough from even a small piece of an interview to do a reasonable dissertation, a study, whatever. You don't have to cover everything.
I just got to add one thing, two things. No post-hocking. So that means analyze as you go. Write it down before you talk to somebody. So before you have an interview, what do you think is going to happen, and write it down, and then compare that with what happened. Otherwise, you're just post-hocking. You're just like, oh, I confirmed this, I confirmed that. Well, did you even write down what you were going to confirm? So that's big thing for Pepper and Popper, is Pierce and Popper, right? And that you don't do post hoc analysis without first writing down what your abductions were, your deductions, tracking your inductive process, and then making sense of that. And you're not ad hocing either. You're not just going in there, without an idea, fishing. It's a very disciplined approach, self-correcting methodology, where you write down your abductions, you go and try your tests and your inductions, see how they work, modify everything for the next round. So you go back to that person, you've adjusted your abductions, you've tweaked your theory, deduction, you're tweaking your tests you're going to do, you're changing the stories you're going to tell, and you're going back in again. So it's multiple rounds of investigation. And Yeah, we don't differentiate qualitative and quantitative anymore. If we ever did, it's no physicist would say, "Oh, I'm not going to do qualitative research." Really, you're not going to play around with the quarks and the sporks and whatever. You're not going to like look at these little diagrammatic things you got, and no, you're going to do all the qualitative you can and all the quantitative you can to figure it out. So we wanted to end with triangulation. Triangulation is the big thing now. Mixed method. You did mixed method. Oh, you've got a really great study because you mixed your methods. Well, mixing methods in triangulation is not the same thing as integrating. So you come up with, somebody says, "Oh, Sally was absent. I had to fill in for her." And then you say, "Okay, well, how many times does that happen?" "Well, once a month lately." "Well, what does that cost you?" "Well, I get paid more than Sally, so let's see. And I'm not able to do the work I'm doing. I'm getting paid for that." So then you start to quantify your qualitative insight, you know? So we don't separate as mixed method. We say, "Oh, okay, we're there to sort out the qualitative and how often it happens and where it happens to who, with what impact. So we think triangulation could use another iteration of development.
So, yeah, because I don't know if it's changed since I was in school, but it was used, I think, as a means of saying, I got this, and there's some other piece of information that agrees with it, so therefore it's okay.
Yeah.
Rather than, and one of
Yeah.
the things you said is to look all the way along at where we might be wrong, where we
Yeah.
might be off base. And you can't do that if you're always looking for agreement.
That's it. You got it. That's the main message. We'll stand on that.
Your work has been insightful to me directly on I've got something I'm building to help PhDs using online materials in a professional development way to help PhDs finish. And it's a mix up. And I just did my first beta test on it and had a bunch of students go through. And now I've got to tell the story of what happened to help other universities think, this is cool enough where we're going to invest in her being able to do that, because it's pretty cool. And we got really mixed results. Like, we got great results on some side, and they didn't do anything over here. So what happened with that? Anyway, I like the abduction, induction business. I didn't write down what I had in mind, but I still really know what I thought was going to happen. And then now I'm telling the story of how that was the same and different than what actually happened. And then and of course it's iterative, because this is just a beta test. And some people say life is always in beta, but you're going to do it again because you want to get it right. So this conversation is going to show up in a poster next week.
Yay.
Graduate school's reading. So I'm glad I didn't design it yesterday, because then I'd have to redo it. Let me just see what we have. Oh, that's 7 of 7. Great conversation. Last comments?
One thing I'm learning from building an Earthship greenhouse is nothing is ever right the first time or the second or the 10th time. I have to keep redoing it over and over until I get enough skill to get a wall to stand up or a roof to stay on, and I don't even know how to grow things yet. I'm just building,
Well, I think Grace Ann would say that no relationship with an animal is stagnant or right the first time either.
We ride horses, and my horse keeps teaching me new things, and he keeps outwitting all my strategies. And without
I
a
think I
without a
definitely have that.
coach. The coach will say, "Well, you gotta gently pull the reins so that the bit travels across the tongue." And I'm going, really? Okay. Okay, let me practice that for a while. So there's always something new to learn.
Yeah. The beauty and the hardship. So, Grace Ann, any last thoughts for all the great people we can't see right now, but they've watched through this and you've given them good ideas?
One of the things we learned from Mark Vanderklate was the refutation part, to seek out the other side. So include in your research approach that you're going to find somebody who's likely to say, this was a waste of time. I don't believe in this at all, or whatever. And that was a good thing to keep in mind, that we should, that's a positive part of building our science.
Yeah,
Oh,
New Zealand doctoral student in information sciences who agreed to do the self-correcting method in his dissertation. So he'd get 2 or 3 people and interview them and do the storytelling sharing back and forth. And then he would find 1 or 2 other people that disagreed with those people and himself, and then interview them. And then he would go on, figure out, what did I learn from all that, and then do the next round and get some more people that are in the zone and some other people that were like, no, that's ridiculous stuff. And he was a real pioneer. So there have been about 6 doctoral students in the last 2 years that have tried this stuff out in their dissertation. So we wrote the book on doing conversational storytelling interviews for your dissertation. So we hope it'll be helpful when it comes out.
So when does it come out, and who's publishing it for the people watching?
Elger Press, I think.
Elger, yeah.
Elger.
Edward Elger.
Yeah. And, when they get done copy editing it.
Right. So if it's finished now and it's on to the copy editor, it's probably going to be about a year, about 2021 is going to come out.
Yeah, on my website, we've got the original manuscript up there with all of the uncopy edited pieces.
And your website is?
DavidBoje.com.
And Boje is Boje.
Correct.
They all run together, no dots in the middle?
Oh, yeah, just run it all together.
Just run it all together.
Put a dot in there, .com.
So I would add to that what's running through my mind right now is how in the story about Popper and Eccles.
Yeah, Sir Eccles.
So it wasn't just that he gave up a stream of research that he had worked on for 20 years because the refutation thing showed him where his holes were. And so he totally changed. And that's how he got the Nobel Prize, not by justifying what he'd done for 20 years.
Well, can you imagine, he goes to Popper's lecture, right? And he takes 23 pages of single space notes that are typed. Okay, this is on an actual typewriter, so he had to scroll them out by hand, then go to this typewriter, type it all out. To have that much intensity, who does that? Goes and listens to somebody's presentation, takes 23 pages of notes. He was really believing that this guy would make a difference in his research, and took it very seriously.
So that,
in technology, I had a conversation with the university the other day, and what he said was, we've got to learn to watch the critical statements that come through. The critical statements, because we put so much of our guts into building these things, we love we loved it statements, but the second go round is, what are those we don't love it statements telling us, and where are we going to go next from those?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And that takes a certain strength of humanity to be able to look at that in the face. It's sort of the thing that we love and hate about peer review. It makes my work stronger, but God, it doesn't feel good. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, I'm going to say goodbye to our watchers. You guys hang out for a second. I'm going to turn off the recording. I hope this was useful to you. We really, really hope that this. And David is available at davidboje.com. So go look at his stuff and take this conversation where you can possibly take it. And let me just hit the recording tab and the off button. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.